characteristics of this church. We said that this church was built very, very quickly, in only 54 years, and that this allowed that the architectonical style was a single one. Right? This is one of the best examples that we can find of this Southern Gothic, as it was called, the Gothic that was developed here in the Crown of Aragon. This also includes, for example, the south of France. It's called Southern Gothic, and it's especially different. It's set apart from the French most typical Gothic, especially Notre Dame, Chartres, okay? This is an example of a French typical church, right? This is the Cathedral of Lyon. Here we have a very tall central nave, right? And very short lateral ones. The lateral naves here are the half of the central one, right? You can compare it with Santa Maria del Mar, where the three corridors of the church are more or less as high. There are only these 3 or 4 meters of difference between them. We will be there in a minute, so we will see them very closely, but you can see that the optical effect that we have in these churches is completely different. In a French church, normally we will be amazed by the heightness of the central nave. It seems even higher than it is in reality because the rest of the building is much shorter. Here instead we don't have this feeling of heightness, but of immensity, of a very big space inside of the church, very open, that has been compared sometimes with like a public square, a very open place of meeting without barriers to our eyes, where even though the church is divided in 3, the space seems like a single one, right? The division is much more stressed in a French church, right? The 3 corridors are much clearly divided. The difference of heightness in a French church normally is solved through these very typical flying arcs. They are carrying all this weight from the central nave to the buttresses. Here we won't find them because we don't need them, as the 3 naves of the church are more or less as high. All the weight from the central nave goes directly to the buttresses through the lateral naves themselves. So we can have a more regular and simpler Gothic than in the north. The second difference is a little bit harder to see. Normally when we go inside one of these churches, big churches, normally we find a very long space like this one, but we will find transepts as well. Transepts are perpendicular corridors. Normally churches have the shape of a cross, right? This one doesn't. This one is called a basilica church, right? Because it shares the shape of the basilicas, Roman basilicas, right? It consists in this single space, divided in 3 corridors, and as you can see, the 2 lateral corridors are connected behind the major altar. This is very important. You can walk around the major altar. This is dividing the space of the church. There can be a big mass here, right, in the major altar that, I don't know, all this with people, that people of the neighborhood can go inside as well, see one of these chapels, right, and go away without entering in the central part. So we won't disturb one worship with the other, okay? Probably the most important picture is this one. This is the church before and after the fire of 1936. This is probably the traditional look of a Catholic church, right? With all this ornamentation. Here we had the choir that sang in the first half of the central nave, and we have especially this huge altarpiece, Baroque, from the 18th century. It arrived to the levels of the columns. It was very, very high, and it was completely lost after the fire. You can see all the damages of this fire. It's very impressive to see them. We can still today see all these traces, but it's also very interesting, I think, to compare this first image to what we see nowadays. After 45 years of restoration here, they didn't want to go back to this first style, but to this very emptiness that we see today, right? Stressing precisely this feeling of emptiness that we have here, of openness in the church, okay? Do you have any questions before going up? Ever? You're just on time. We will do some sport. We will go up. We will go through this tower. This tower is this one. This is like the main facade of the church. We will go up through this tower until the level of the rose window. We will be walking just here, okay, in these chapels. We will stop here for 5 minutes. Then we will go up through the other tower to the lateral nave. So we will be standing over there where those little rose windows are. And then we will end on the top of the church, okay, 34 meters of heightness. We will see the views and go back again through the same tower. If you have your tickets on your hand, you can show them to my colleague, and let's go up.
You can show me the tickets before going out. Yeah, that is okay. 1, either 2. Yeah. Gracias.
Everybody okay? And alive? Yeah? Let's go here under the rose window.
Rest for minutes here. We are on the main facade of Santa Maria del Mar.
In fact, this stone here, this very big stone, is like the top of the main door where you probably came in from, right? So we are just walking over this principal door, right? And we are just under the great rose window of Santa Maria del Mar, the biggest one in this church. It's not the biggest one in Barcelona. There's one even bigger than this one. This one has 8.5 meters of length. There's one church which is called Santa Maria del Pi. It's very close to Las Ramblas, and that church has the biggest rose window not only in Barcelona but in Catalonia. Okay, this rose window was made in the second half of the 15th century. But first of all, Santa Maria del Pi, the other church, was started 9 years before this one and was ended 10 years later. So they had more time to see what they've done here, right? There was a lot of competition between the neighborhoods, a lot of rivalry, and a few years later they did a rose window in Santa Maria del Pi that has 1 more meter than this one, right? This one has 8.5, the other 9.5, almost 10 meters. The one that we see here today is not original, it's not the one that was made in the 14th century, but on the second half of the 15th, 100 years after this church was ended. Why? The original one collapsed and fell the 2nd of February of the 1428, a very important day here in Barcelona. There was a big earthquake. You can see all the cracks on the wall, right, that are visible still today. It is thought that this earthquake arrived to 6.57 degrees in the Richter scale, a very big one. And here the rose window collapsed and fell. The problem is that the 2nd of February is a very important religious festivity here. The day of the candles, La Candelaria. People was inside celebrating this big mass. The church was full of people, as the chronics say. When the earthquake started, there was some kind of human avalanche of people trying to go out of this building, and the rose window collapsed and fell inside, right? So, depending on the chronic that we read, we know that 20, 25 or even 30 people, they say in some died this day because of this disaster. They were buried right here in this square because until the 18th century, graveyards were always around churches, right? So this was like the biggest graveyard in the neighborhood. You can see all these buildings still didn't are from the 19th century, so in that moment they didn't exist. The square was much bigger than now, and it was the biggest graveyard in this neighborhood. The Fosada Las Mureras, the graveyard that we have at the other side with a very big monument, a red one, was also a graveyard, was like the smallest one, but that one was even older than this one. The other graveyard was from the 11th century, from the previous church, the Romanesque church of this neighborhood. Okay? Anyway, after this big earthquake, Santa Maria del Mar didn't have rose window for like 25 years. This was covered with wood. And it was in this 1459 when they ordered this second one. This one was not made in the same style than the rest of the church. You can see it, it's much more complicated, much more ornamented than the rest. This is a French fashion that came in this moment in the 15th century. It's called the Flamboyant Gothic because of its shapes. It seems like a big fire of colors inside of the church, right? And it's one of the few elements of this Flamboyant Gothic that we can find here in Barcelona, the second rose window of Santa Maria del Mar. All these rose windows are not in Romanesque churches, because in Romanesque churches the weight of the church goes directly to this walls of the facade, right? So we cannot open big windows there because the church falls, right? The Gothic style wants to illuminate churches much more than the previous one, right? So they have to take away the weight from here and to take it to the buttresses. The buttresses are these walls that we have here all around the church. These are the walls that are really sustaining the central nave of the church, so we can open much bigger windows in these facades, right? For example, there was another window here open in the 18th century to give more light to the major altar that was closed afterwards in a restoration, but it's proving to us that we can even find, we can even open more windows in these walls, right? Because we won't put in danger the structure of the church. In a French church, in this Gothic from the north of Europe, they need more natural light than here in the south. So this wall even almost disappears, right? It's all full of windows. So it's another difference from the southern Gothic. Okay? Any questions until the moment? Have we rested a little bit? Yeah, more stairs? Let's go. Very well. That's it. I will be the last one, okay? So up to the next level, please.
Thank you.
We have done the worst part. We are now standing on the top of one of the lateral naves of the church, what we saw from the inside. So we said that one of the main characteristics of this Gothic style is the small difference of height between the naves. Here you have it. This is the central nave, and this is the lateral one. There are only these 4 meters of difference. If this was a French church that we saw Lyon, for example, this nave would be much shorter, and the central nave and the buttresses would be that we saw there that are not here. Here we only have these triangular walls, but they are not carrying weight from the church, but the water of the rain, right? You can see those channels on the top of these walls. The water of the rain goes down from the main roof and goes out of the church through the mouth of the gargoyles. You can see that there are 2 gargoyles on every buttress because of the 2 levels of the roof. Right? The water goes out through their mouths. The water from this level goes down through those holes that we have on the corners until the gargoyles downstairs. Okay, so this is like the system to will take out the water of the rain. Here we have another rose window, much smaller than the previous one, but also different, right? Much simpler, much more regular. This stone is from the 14th century. This is like the original style of rose windows in this church. So probably the big rose window that fell the day of the earthquake was something more similar to this than to what we see nowadays, right? Not this flamboyant style, much more complex, but this one, okay? This is like the previous one. All these black marks are from the fire of the 1936. The smoke went out during 10 days through all these windows, so all the stone got black. And we have another system here, the system of ventilation. All these holes are open through all the rooftop, right? There are more than 200 of them all over the roof. So as hot air tends to go up, in summer they all remain uncovered and the hot air keeps on going out from the church, right, through the top. It's a very old system, even Romanesque churches used it, and it's very funny because from here, for example, you can see the lights of the lamps downstairs, and even some candles from the chapel. You can take a look. See, hello. You can see them, right? Not from this one, that one better, yeah. In winter and when it rains, someone had to go up and a very bad job, but that way the water of the rain didn't go inside. You can say hello to the people downstairs. Like a new miracle or something. Okay. Any questions for the moment? We will